in the busyness of the legislative session. Are there any MWG members who are joining by phone today, or anyone standing in for an MWG member? All right, hearing none. And for all of the non-members, thanks for participating. We'll save some time at the end of the meeting for public comments. I'll turn it to the co-chairs, Kim Coble and Mike Powell, for any opening remarks.
Kim, you want to start off?
Yeah, just welcome everybody, and thank you again for investing the time and energy. We've got this is an hour meeting today, but we're going to have some good conversations around the legislative session. So I look forward to updating you guys on that.
Again, I echo the thanking everybody coming. The other subject we're going to cover today is begin to delve a bit into on the transportation side. What kind of bang for the buck can we get on different alternatives, right? Are there if we have a certain amount of money, we want to invest in everything, but are there some where we get more productivity in return than others? So I think it's going to be an enlightening discussion.
And I'll just make one programming note. The steering committee met last week, and just a heads up for April, the MWG meeting in April will likely spend most of our time, if not the entire meeting, on a review of the climate legislation that passed and perhaps didn't pass during the legislative session. So April is a busy time for us at MDE and with the Climate Commission to kind of, digest everything that happened in the session and then pivot our work plans and look ahead. So for MDE, a lot of that looks like trying to figure out how to restructure and reprioritize our work to meet new legislative demands. And for the Climate Commission, it often looks like considering the progress that was made on climate policy, the gaps that still exist, and then thinking about the recommendations that you all want to make this year to help fill the remaining gaps. So that's the quick look ahead for April. Today, as Mike indicated, we're going to focus on travel efficiency and VMT reduction measures, a look at the benefits and costs. So quick lead in here, and then I'll turn it over to the presenters. During the MWG meeting last month, several members expressed interest in spending some time this year thinking about strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, which the EPA is now calling travel efficiency measures. We also heard some interest in wanting to explore the types of measures that achieve the greatest emission reductions per dollar spent, or as I think Mike has put in the past, where's the greatest bang for the buck? We're grateful to be joined by Darren Lovas from MDOT, who might still be in a meeting down the hall and will be joining us shortly if he's not here yet, and Cecile Adracanti from Cambridge Systematics to dive into the intersection of these topics. Cecile, I see that you're on camera, and we might not have Darren with us yet. So do you want to get us started?
Yes, we can start on and see when Darren can join and chime in.
Great. And do you want me to pull your slides up, or?
Yeah, that would be great if you can do that.
Try to get the right window here.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mark, for the introduction. And really quickly, want to thank the Mitigation Working Group for this opportunity to discuss transportation sector decarbonization with a focus on the VMT reduction strategies. So before we get into these things, I just want to acknowledge that this is work that is that we are supporting for MDOT as a team of Cambridge Systematics and Michael Baker team who have been supporting this effort for years now. And we also have Navneet Saurajan, who is from Cambridge Systematics, who has supported the emission reduction strategy estimation for the team on the call to answer any technical questions. So over the next half an hour or so, if we can go to the next slide, please, Mark.
And Mark, I think you got it in preview version, so we're seeing 3 slides and small thumbnails on the left.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just trying to correct that on my side. Let me try this again. My apologies. It just disappeared. Come on. Sorry, folks, too many screens. Let me try this. Does that look right?
It still has the next slide on.
Yeah, it still shows the next slide rather than just the one slide.
It's called presentation view.
There you go.
Yep.
Oh, goody. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Thanks, Mark. So if we can advance to the next slide, please. All right. So over the next half an hour or so, we will provide some contextual orientation to MDOT's CPRP plan and provide an overview of the transport sector emission reduction strategies that we have evaluated as part of that plan. And we'll drill down into the VMT reduction strategies as is interest to this mitigation working group's agenda, and discuss some implementation considerations in terms of like what data that we have right now, what do we need to make additional decisions, and so on and so forth. And we'll also end with some next steps and recommendations. Next slide, please. So I'll breeze through some of these slides, some of what some you might have already seen. So I just wanted to mention through this that we have a long history of supporting greenhouse gas planning in Maryland, led by Maryland Department of Transportation for the transport sector. And this is even more significant now, given that the transportation sector is the single largest sector in terms of emissions for greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland. That represents 35% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So we have been developing bottom-up emissions inventory and modeling for the transportation sector. So this has been very informative in terms of where we stand at any given modeling year and how we continue to track transportation sector emissions over time, as well as projecting emissions to the scenario year, this being 2031 and 2045 in the long run, and developing that comprehensive approach for decarbonization of the transportation sector. So you can see that over the last 15 years, MDOT has developed 6 plans, including the most recent, which is in 2023, very recently, and also the carbon reduction strategy to the top right corner, which is federally required to be submitted. It was in November of 2023. And we have also been annually reporting on the status reports, annual status reports as part of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, and then the subsequent reauthorization, and now the CSNA plan targets. Next slide, please. So Just a little bit of background and purpose of the plan itself. So it is a complementary sector-specific plan that MDOT has continued to develop over the years. It provides that blueprint for reducing greenhouse gas transportation sector greenhouse gas emission reductions, and it's a bottom-up approach, as we have discussed over the years. It's based on vehicle populations, building an inventory from the bottom up, which is something that is done in accordance with the national emissions inventory that is also submitted to the EPA every 3 years. So among the key pieces of information that this plan provides, it provides an understanding of the reduction potential of some of the strategies, which we'll get into more and more, specifically for VMT reductions. We already talked about the inventory and projections. So where do we stand in any modeling year, and where are we supposed to be headed in a given scenario year, in this case, 2031. Thank you. So there are, so let's get into some of the emission reduction strategies themselves. And next slide, please. So you might have seen this slide before when Darren presented an overview of MDOT CPRP previously, but we broadly classify the strategies in terms of like funded strategies and unfunded strategies. So the committed strategies and policies that are in blue to the left are the ones that that have been on the books as far as federal standards and state mandates and projected VMT growth and vehicle standards and so on and so forth, and also the CTP itself and MPO plans and programs. So those are all in the funded and committed strategies part. And then there are like, what else can we spend if there is additional funding available? And these are the potential new initiatives on the right in orange. These are the unfunded programs. And there are also strategies that have some uncertainty associated with them in terms of technological maturity, things that are not mainstream yet, but there is some potential to consider them in the whole mix of like transportation sector greenhouse gas reductions. Next slide, please. So we wanted to show this slide to talk about how we drill down and categorize some of these emission reductions and where they are actually coming from. So the avoid, shift, improve framework explains this in a well-organized manner. So avoiding some of the travel that is required, that is either through a single occupant vehicle mode or more carbon intensive mode, is one way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions through also reducing vehicle miles traveled. And then on the other hand is the shifting to a more carbon efficient mode of travel. That would be transit, and it could be switching from trucks to intermodal rail and other ways. You will also see the switch to active mobility and public transportation in the shift category. And then there is the improve part, and this typically doesn't fall under VMT reductions, but there is like an area of overlap that you can see. But the improve part gets at some of the efficiency improvements in operations. That could be your TISMO strategies, what we call system efficiency strategies, and all of that that are also part of transportation emission reductions. Next slide, please. So as part of the overall modeling exercise, we have looked at a total of 40 different emission reduction strategies that are classified into 4 different buckets. So VMT reduction, transportation technology, congestion mitigation, and sustainable design and transportation practices. So 3 of these are on-road emission strategies, and the 4th one is off-road. So that is one of the reasons why you don't see any strategies under the last bucket. But of the 40, 18 of them are VMT reduction strategies. So these are those avoid or shift strategies that you have seen in the earlier slide. And they account for a total of 41% of the emission reductions that are projected to be reduced by 2031. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of our guiding stars within MDOT, which provide North Star to VMT reduction. So one of them is the Maryland Transportation Plan, and this is the statewide plan, which provides a futuristic assessment and blueprint for 2050 for broad trends, what is it going to look like, and lays out some goals, objectives, and strategies for the transportation sector. And you can see that the goals at the very top, and the one goal that is pertinent to our purpose here is promoting environmental stewardship. And you can see that the relevant measure is VMT and VMT per capita. And the target that has been set out for the year 2050 is the 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled per capita with respect to 2019 numbers by 2050. Next slide, please. So over the next several slides, I'll provide some context to where we are at so that we can benchmark ourselves in terms of what has been happening. And also, we'll get at how this goal and our modeling process intersect. So give me one second. So a couple of things that you can see on the slide here. So what you're looking at primarily is 10 years worth of VMT and per capita VMT data. And VMT is on the left axis and shown in the blue bars. And it's in millions of vehicle miles traveled. And the dotted orange line is the per capita VMT. So one thing that you can see is that VMT and VMT per capita both peaked in 2019 at almost 60 billion VMT and 10,000 vehicle miles per capita. And you can also see the dip afterwards due to the pandemic. And if you can also look at the number, 8,300, and we'll come back to that number afterwards just for contextual purposes. But you see that we are coming out of that dip. There is a rebound. But there are some uncertainties and things that we are paying attention to as we are coming out of this. So one of them has to do with trends in telework. And the second one has to do with the number of driver's licenses. So two things that are remarkable here. So 24% of the people, according to the American Community Survey, work from home in the state, as opposed to 18% nationwide. And so we have some, so that is one of the reasons you don't see the immediate the ramp up or like back to those pre-pandemic levels. And that is one of the things that is behavioral in nature, that is reducing VMT. And the second thing that we talked about is the number of licensed drivers during the 2019 peak has actually come down by about 65,000. So that is another thing to watch out for. Next slide, please. So this chart just shows the target. So we are roughly at we were roughly at 10,000 vehicle miles per capita in 2019, and we need to get to roughly 8,000 by 2050. Next slide, please. So over the next slide, several slides, we'll go through the connection between the targeted reduction and what the MDOT CPRP provides in terms of like what can be achieved in reducing this VMT. So first, we project the historic growth rates when it comes to VMT, and so those gray bars are all actuals, and they are all like submitted to the highway performance management system, and that is also the basis for how we project it out to 2031 as part of our modeling process. So based on the historic growth rates, there is a 2% annual VMT increase that you can see to 2031. And once we factor in the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization plans and programs, and the investments that they are making, including transportation demand management and others, those investments and strategies reduce that growth rate to 1.1%. Next slide, please. So really want to set the, so quickly, can we go back to the last slide really quick so that I can, yeah, so if you can please pay that attention to the 67 billion number and the 62 billion number, and if we can advance to the next slide. So those are the numbers that we actually start in terms of like the projected increase from 2022 that is indicated by that blue bar on the chart. And from there on, these are all if you move to the right, the red bars and the red arrows that correspond to those decreases are the result of the VMT reduction due to plans and programs and the committed strategies that you have looked at, and also the potential new initiatives, the rightmost ones, which are the 3.2 and the 3.6 billion VMT reductions. So as you can see, there is the potential to reduce VMT by 18%, but only if that additional investments are made towards the potential new initiatives. So the way these VMT reductions happen, and we have talked about this in the avoid, shift, and improve slide a little bit earlier. These happen through trip consolidation. That would be carpooling and van pooling. They happen through mode switch. So you're switching from a less efficient mode of travel, that would be driving alone, to transit, or more carbon intensive other ways of efficient strategies, including bicycle and pedestrian and intercity transit and others. And then there is the straight out trip reduction or foregoing of trips, which includes transportation demand management. So you are being provided to consolidate trips or to forego trips in some cases, and you're being provided parking and pricing initiatives and car sharing options so that you are not traveling using the single occupant vehicles. Next slide, please. So here is a slide that captures our modeling assumptions. And if we were to plot um, the straight line between the 2019 per capita VMT and the target in 2050, so you can see that the midpoint, so at 2031, we are going to be, so we are, if it were to be a straight line, so we would have to end up at somewhere around 8,800 per capita VMT. And you can see that the two strategies, the potential new initiatives, actually bound that number. And it just goes to say that it is very critical that that additional funding be made available or realized for meeting this VMT reduction strategy. Next slide, please. So let's discuss a little bit more about the modeling outputs for supporting some decision making and implementation considerations when it comes to how strategies are selected and evaluated over the next several slides. Next slide, please. So we, as part of the MDOT CPRP, we estimate the greenhouse gas reduction and costs in a quantitative manner. So those are estimated based on real data and studies and research, primary research, and all of that. But there are also qualitative and admittedly subjective criteria that go into some of these, some of the selection process. That includes funding availability, so whether they are currently funded or not. So you have seen the committed strategies versus potential new initiatives. And there is a consideration for authority. So what is within MDOT control? A lot of transportation sector decarbonization strategies have to do with a lot of dependency on both technology, partnerships, as well as straight up ridership and behavior. And the final among the four, I think, yeah. So, and then there is the technological maturity, which gets at how ready some of these technologies are. Like that can be the CAV technology, or for example, the electronic tolling, which is already implemented. And so the feasibility of some of these strategies is very dependent on how readily available and how proven some of these technologies are. And if they are still not very mature or very much out there, we assign a low feasibility to it. And there are three other things that MDOT is currently studying or proposes to study as part of consideration for decision making. And those include the impacts of land use, enabling policy. That includes the impacts of incentives and coordination with local partners and all of that, and community readiness, which takes into consideration some of the equity aspects, and there is a lot of place-related and context-related strategies where they are applied. For example, so one good example would be application of transit in an urban setting versus a rural setting, and so those are all considerations of like community readiness and all of that. Next slide, please. So I'll take some time to orient you to this slide before getting into some of the overarching observations and takeaways. The chart that you see on this slide is a bubble chart of VMT reduction and associated strategies that we considered in the m.cprp. A quick note of things here. There is the size of the bubble, which stands for the potential estimated reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And just for scale, the blue bubble accounts for 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents, while and that gets at the MPO plans and programs that we discussed a little while ago. While the red line at the very top, so that indicates 0.005 million metric tons of CO2. So that's just the scale of difference between these two. I also want to draw your attention to the color of some of these strategies. Red indicating behavioral, which gets at buy-in from riders and users of the transportation system in terms of like switching to transit or foregoing trips or using transportation demand management strategies.
What's the horizontal axis again? It's blocked on our screen.
Yes, I'll get to the axis in just.
I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll and the axis, which are so the y-axis is the cost per ton of CO2 reductions, and the horizontal axis is the feasibility that we talked about. The four subjective criteria, including funding status, MDOT control, technological maturity, and the timeline for completion. So 4 things. And this is the part, the x-axis is the part that I was talking about, which is qualitative and subjective. And the y-axis numbers are all, the y-axis numbers and the size of the dots have all been quantified and estimated as part of the process. So the more cost-effective and feasible the strategies are, they appear to the right-hand side bottom corner. And as you move to the left and move to the top, that means that there are some implementation challenges associated with them, and also higher price tags as it relates to the reduction potential estimated.
School buses really look good in this, right?
Yeah, and
yeah.
I'll actually get into that a little bit. That only considers the share of the state share, while it is still a pilot program, so not all costs are associated as part of that. So it might be a little bit misleading on that. So next slide, please. So let's start with the behavioral strategies in the red, which require changes in the travel behavior into trip reduction or switching to efficient modes. A real quick couple of observations here, and there is a lot of research currently underway to understand the true costs of telework, which are coming into focus more and more. You can see that it's a big dot up near the top among those strategies. So we are still like getting a good handle on what are the true costs of that telework. And you can also see to the left the pay-as-you-drive strategy, which has been a challenge in scaling up, which has been in our modeling for quite a while and in existence for a while, but it's still like having some challenges scaling up. Next slide, please. The green bubbles, or the infrastructure ones. So these are what we are calling capital intensive strategies. So these would require some building of infrastructure, capital intensive work to flow from there, acquiring fleet, maintenance facilities, construction of maintenance facilities, and things like that. So you will actually see that the TOD build out and the expanded rail transit on the low feasibility side of things And that's primarily due to that capital-intensive nature of these strategies and the time it really takes for that ramp up, especially for the TOD build-out, because it has to do with land use changes and a lot of local buy-in. Next slide, please. Finally, the purple bubbles are the technology ones. These include the fleet innovation, bus certification, and the NEVI funding. And I wanted to see if Darren is here to see if he can put a finer point on this. And
Yes, I'm finally here, Cecile. Thank you for carrying on in my absence. So how can
thanks,
I
Darren.
be helpful or unhelpful in terms of what you need?
We just wanted to to provide this to line it up for you to talk a little bit about the fleet electrification and the transit bus electrification. That was a point that you wanted to raise.
Oh no! I mean, what's on here is accurate. It's this is the potential that we've estimated, and of course, it's proven to be a challenge both with school buses and transit buses to transition the fleets, given the costs involved and the fiscal issues we're facing. I think that's mainly what you wanted me to mention.
Yes, exactly.
Which won't be news to everyone.
Great. And with that, let me turn it over. Turn over the last slide to Darren to take us to next steps and recommendations. Darren?
Yeah. So thanks everyone for taking all of this in. I realize it's a lot of information, especially those last few slides. And when Cecile showed me a 4 variable based set of graphs, I told him you're going to have to spend some time unpackaging these, and there will undoubtedly be a lot of questions about these, and people will probably want to take these away and digest them and come back and ask questions, which totally makes sense. So in terms of our continuing work to understand the effectiveness of these various measures and cost effectiveness, we want to look at some of the land use and transportation interactions involved. And that's especially the case with transit investments, which look costly. However, I'll point out that what was in the graphs is our near-term emission reductions estimates, and don't take into account possible complementary policies, such as changes in local land use regulation in order to encourage transit-oriented development, something we're really focused on at MDOT. In fact, I have a counterpart, another chief at MDOT, that's new to in this administration, who focuses exclusively on transit-oriented development. And then a question is, what about community readiness for the implementation of various strategies? They're going to vary in terms of effectiveness and suitability based on the place, so the context, and then their equity implications are also vary. And that's especially the case with pricing mechanisms. And then what kind of enabling policy do we need on the books? Not just state policy, but local policy. And this is where, this stuff gets more complicated than vehicle standards, for example, as complicated as that is, and vehicle incentives, as complicated as that is. This is, you have a policy frameworks that need to be dealt with. And then the question of the increasing electrification of every vehicle mile of travel, every trip, and the fleet. How does that affect the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of these measures? And that underscores that there are other reasons to pursue VMT reductions, which I'm sure Cecile talked about earlier, co-benefits, namely, such as reduction of other types of criteria, air pollution, although you also get that from electrification of vehicles, but you have improvements in quality of life, increased physical activity, increased access to transportation choices and different opportunities, and that kind of thing. And then the last thing on there is questions about roadway maintenance and state of good repair as vehicles get heavier, laden down by batteries. And our understanding about this is that's more a problem with medium and heavy duty vehicles than light duty vehicles, given the weight differential, but it's still something we need to contend with in terms of maintaining our transportation system and our tens of thousands of tens of thousands of miles of roads in Maryland. And then synergies. And this is where this again gets complicated, in that these strategies shouldn't be viewed in isolation. And that's one of the limits of, again, of the analysis you saw in the graphs. How can they be combined in a particular place or a particular corridor or a particular region? And how can they be phased in over time? Pricing strategies are fastest, often very cost effective. Transit strategies, when accompanied by land use, that kind of infrastructure investment is a longer term play. And you can see where you can phase in various strategies over time to achieve a bigger combined effect synergistically. So we're looking forward to the mitigation working group taking a look at this and figuring out how it helps with shaping future recommendations and any pilot studies we might do as a follow-up to this. This is a continuing area of investigation for MDOT and kind of on the cutting edge and an area where I think there's more room for development and growth. So that's what I'd say.
Can you go back one slide? And I just want to make sure I understand that slide and then open it up to questions from members of the work group. And I think Bob Wright is first in line. Let me just make sure I understand the chart. So as I read this chart, in terms of cost effectiveness, then this third variable of feasibility, school buses look really good. Expanded rail, regional transit do not. Am I reading it right? I'm just trying to, I picked a couple of them to make sure I understand the graph. So zero emission school buses are bottom right and expanded rail regional is top left.
Yep,
so if we were looking at, because there's trade-offs, right? I mean, obviously if we do everything on this, we do everything on this. But I mean, I'm looking at it and thinking like school buses are number one, that if you run out of money, rail regional transit may be lower on the criteria. Airport shuttle buses look good. On-road technology look good. I just want to make sure I understand the sort of the way this chart works.
That's right. So anything to the right-hand side bottom corner is high feasibility and again, very cost-effective. And I mentioned about the zero-emission school buses. So the total cost of acquiring the buses and other things is not included at this time because we only looked at the pilot implementation of the program. So not all costs are included, but you're generally right that everything to the right-hand bottom corner is good, quicker implementation as opposed to the top left, which has a cost as well as an implementation challenge.
Before I turn it over to Bob and then to Kim, just real quickly, do you have any idea what the average life or turnover of school buses are? In other words, I mean, I would assume school buses don't get many years before they, with all that mileage and stoppage and going, before they have to be replaced anyway. But am I wrong? Or if you don't know,
I'll have to look that up. I know that transit bus useful life ULB is 12 years, but it would be shorter for a school bus because of the miles that it travels. Yes.
I'm sorry to monopolize there. Bob, I think you were first and then Kim.
Okay. I'm also trying to understand this chart. So the y-axis is vehicle miles traveled with the top one like 1 billion. So when I look at expanded telework and I look at the size of the circle, I'm trying to understand what the size of the circle then means. It's a great chart and it allows you to make relative comparisons, but I don't know what the size of the circle is. It's around 10,000. If you look at the axis, the Y, what I call the Y axis. Now, is that the maximum amount in that circle? I don't understand the circle. And then my last question is, I don't understand the large blue circle. What is the large blue circle?
Yes. Do you want me to go, Cecile? You want to?
Yes,
Sure.
please go ahead.
So when I first looked at this, I realized, wow, there is a lot of information here. So there's 4 variables. The size of the circle is emissions. So that's tonnage, right? The color of the circle is the type of strategy. The x-axis is how feasible the strategy is, and the y-axis is how costly it is, right? So, and the blue circle that these look like planets to me, so that looks like Jupiter. I believe that is assuming current MPO plans and programs get implemented effectively, right? So we have 7 MPOs. They all have plans and programs, including investments that will reduce VMT and reduce greenhouse gases. So the big assumption there is that they all get implemented effectively and faithfully, and then that's the emission reductions you'd achieve. So this underscores how important metropolitan planning organizations are to figuring out how to achieve VMT reductions.
Okay, the quantity that's reduced is the size of the circle.
That's correct.
But is there somewhere that we can get a sense of, what one of the circles represents, a quantitative number? So you get a nice relative sense of what one does against the next. I'm only asking, can you, somewhere is there a reference to quantity on one of the circles so that you can get an idea of how much the reduction is? Is that clear?
Yes, that information is actually in the MDOT plan, and it is shown in 2 actual tables, one for the committed strategies and one for the potential new initiatives. So all that information, including the cost, the effectiveness, and the reduction potential, are available.
So can I just add a bit to answer Rob's question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Rob. So to answer your question directly, the big blue circle, what Darren referred to as Jupiter, that's about 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 reductions there, and so that's the biggest circle we have. And you can sort of assume the sort of numbers at the moment for the smaller ones, and the actual numbers, as Susil said, is there in the document.
Okay, Bob, did that answer all your questions?
Yes, thanks, Mike.
Okay, Kim, I think you were next, and then Miguel.
Well, let's say a detailed question and then a big picture question. I'm not sure I'm understanding why zero emission school buses are more feasible and cost less per ton than transit bus electrification.
Yeah, Kim, as I mentioned earlier, we only looked at the pilot or the cost effectiveness numbers. So not all costs are included in the zero emission school buses. So that is the reason I raised that as an exception, that it might be a little bit misleading because it only takes into consideration the grant amount that was available, the $50 million grant amount that was available into consideration, and not the total cost of acquiring the buses.
Are you saying it'd be more expensive to buy buses
Yes.
outside the pilot? I'm not sure I understand why. In other words, you spent 50 million on the pilot. Would another 50 million have similar results or less results or more? I mean, how would it differ?
So that will also have to do with the surrounding infrastructure, maintenance, and charging infrastructure, and all of that goes into to sustain the program, right? So we don't know what parts of that were included in that 50 million. So that is the reason I'm saying there is some uncertainty associated with it.
Gotcha.
Okay. And then I guess maybe Darren, this is a question for you, but what about this research project here surprised you the most? Like, what is the data point that you're like, wow, I didn't realize that?
That is a good question, Kim. And I was surprised at how large some of the circles are, to be honest. The telework, the TDM, and especially the MPO circle, right? I mean, that's a lot. When you add those together, that's a huge portion of the carbon emission reductions you're looking at here. So that was surprising to me. On the other hand, some of the smaller ones, I mean, I guess I wasn't surprised by them, but I was, this doesn't, and you'll see this if you look at the climate pollution reduction plan as well. Transit investments in isolation, especially in the short term, don't look good here. Right. So, I mean, look at the red line dot, for example. I know this, and I also know that this doesn't tell the whole story because, again, it's short term, and it assumes nothing other than an investment in a certain amount of mileage of new rail. But it doesn't look good, and it's transit is expensive. It sort of underscores that fact, especially rail.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we got that, and then I think we may have to move on because we're going to try to limit this to an hour, and we're closing up on an hour. Miguel?
Hey, thanks so much. Miguel Moravec with the Rocky Mountain Institute. This question's for Cecile. I'm a huge fan of Cambridge systematics. I'm particularly a fan of your work or the methodologies that were used by Colorado DOT to show the kitchen table co-benefits of VMT reduction when they were implementing their statewide greenhouse gas performance standard and updating their state plans to reduce VMT. So I bring that up because you said it's critical that new funding is appropriated to achieve the VMT reductions you talked about here today. And decision makers don't speak in VMT. It's very wonky, but they do speak in those kitchen table co-benefits that I know Cambridge Systematics has the capability to produce. So is there any intention during your partnership with Maryland DOT to produce those co-benefit analyses, cost savings, avoided traffic fatalities, and so on to help make the case to the State House to implement these policies?
So initially, I'll just say that the credit on the Colorado work goes to Chris Porter, who leads our decarbonization work and has been doing that for years now. So on the co-benefits side of things, so one of the things that we come up with and hand off typically to MDE to continue with the process of economic analysis and all of that. And I think Towson was the university that has been supporting this work for a while. Chris Hoagland can talk to that a little bit of how previously it was done. So that the inputs, the outputs from our modeling process would feed into their emission, into their economic analysis, and they would come up with number of jobs created and all of that. So we haven't really associated directly the change in travel activity to changes in fatality rates and other things, but yeah, I've seen that work done in California and elsewhere.
Okay, we're running over. Kim, do you want to start your legislative? Because I really would like to get some time for public comment at the end here, and we're going to run over.
Yeah, we are definitely going to run over. Mark, do you
want to delay the?
We can definitely delay the next part of the agenda, which was revisiting the funding prioritization discussion. We can hit that in April. I have a feeling that we might want to revisit these slides for more discussion in April, based on what I see in the chat and just the fact that the MWG throughout last year really identified, looking at VMT reduction strategies under a bigger microscope as being something that the MWG wanted to do this year. Why don't we just take that? This presentation presents a lot of really great detailed data for us to dive into, and the steering committee should think about, how to revisit this topic perhaps at the next meeting. And yet we only have a few minutes left on the schedule for the meeting. Perhaps we just use that time for the legislative update. And if there's time, depending on how quickly, I guess, Kim's able to go through a long list of bills, then we can turn to any quick public comment.
Okay. Thank you. And Mark, I sent you an email with this just right when the meeting started, but I'll go ahead and get started, and if people can catch up if Mark gets it pulled up. Let's see, I've got a bunch of bills, but these bills that I have here are in the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan. There are 6 legislative recommended actions. And so I've included those, as well as some top climate bills that we've been working on that were discussed by the, thank you. So the first one is to take the Renewable Portfolio Standard program and redefine Tier 1 renewable sources of energy that would exclude trash incineration. For the 7th year in a row, that bill was put forward, and it was introduced in both the House and Senate and did not make crossover. So the likelihood of it making it out this session is slim. It is not 0. I want to emphasize that, but it does not look likely. That was one of our recommendations. These are not in any particular order. I want to bring up the budget because funding was a big part of what we talked about in the plan, what we need. We need $1 billion. It's part of every conversation we have. There is no formal revenue generating legislative action that came forward from the administration. Fortunately, Delegate Stein, who's on the commission, has introduced a couple bills around generating revenue. Additionally, though, the governor took $90 million of C funds that had been unspent. Have a debate about that, but technically unspent, and allocated them to 3 top priorities: $17 million to electric school buses, $23 million to multifamily buildings to put EV chargers there, and then $50 million to building electrification. He also called on 50% of the funding going to low to moderate income communities. So that money he put forward in the budget, it stayed intact exactly as he asked for it in the Senate and the House. They're working on resolving some other things in the budget, but they both chambers agree on that. So that's really good news. Granted, it's a very small amount of what we need, but it's more than 0. So that's the benefit there. The next one is a Maryland EV purchasing incentive. And this is to repeal the electric vehicle excise tax credit. And this was introduced in the House and passed the House 103 to 36, and now is over in the Senate. So it's likely that bill will, that bill has momentum and is moving. So that's good. The next bill has to do with the Empower program, and I'm sure Ian's happy to spend time talking about it if you're interested in this, but energy efficiency programs, especially in low income areas, and the program needs some adjustments, some recalibration, if you will. And the House bill was passed by the House 99 to 35 and is now in the Senate. So that one is looking likely or hopeful to be passed. Let's see, the next one was a bill on multifamily housing. This was in the Senate, put in by Senator Feldman, who's also on the commission, requiring new multifamily residential buildings to include EV charging spaces. And the bills were introduced in each chamber, and they remain in each chamber. So that's not necessarily means it hasn't moved. The hill gets a little steeper, but hopefully we can maybe get some action on that one. HB 990 was put in again by Delegate Stein based on a recommendation from the commission to adjust the exemption that manufacturers have had since 2009 from being required to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that passed the House 103 to 35 and is now referred over to the Senate. I haven't heard any problems with that. We talked with the cement manufacturers who will bear the brunt of probably this change more than any other, but they're a great industry to work with, and they've been very helpful. Had some amendments that got on, but were good amendments. Really happy to report to the team on the Climate Education Week. This was a recommendation that came out of ECOS for the governor to designate the first week in April as Climate Education Week. And this is, it passed the House 100 to 33 over to the Senate, and looks very likely to pass. I talked with the administration today about it. Since this bill will not go into effect until later, I believe the governor's office is looking to do a proclamation for this year and then have this bill go into effect. So from here on out, it would be designated. So that's good news there. The HB 1080 or 1008, excuse me, transportation fee. This was a bill that Delegate Stein put in to mimic the oil transportation fee. So right now, it's been on the books for decades, where there's a fee paid to transport oil in the state of Maryland. That same structure would be applied to coal transport as well as natural gas transport. There was a variety of fees that were assessed. Delegate Stein picked 30 cents per million BTUs, and that generated about $300 million. That bill was introduced in the House, did not make it out by crossover, and my understanding is that it's not going to move. Next bill, HB 1272, is a cap and invest program. Again, Delegate Stein. And this was, or is, a bill that requires MDE in collaboration with the commission to start to develop a cap and invest program. In case you haven't read the climate plan recently, the success of getting to 60% is dependent upon a program such as a cap and invest program. And so Delegate Stein felt that it was time to start putting pen to paper and working on it and developing the systems and the program. That was heard in the House and did not make it out for crossover. My understanding is it's likely not going to make it out. Next bill, I'm almost done, is HB 1279 SB 1023. It's called the Better Buildings Act. And this is the same bill in both chambers, and it's to basically require new buildings to be built with energy efficiency in mind, and which makes sense, right? It's a good cost savings thing. I think that recommendations from the committee is very consistent with that. It has been heard by both chambers. Neither chamber has moved it yet. However, latest intelligence is that there's still interest in it. So may or may not move depending on what else is happening. And then the next bill pertains to offshore wind. And this is a bill. So there's lease areas for our offshore wind industry, and Ørsted had a proposal in for one of the lease areas. They have withdrawn that. And so this bill would allow a revision to that round 2 lease area authorization. And that moved out of the House and is in the Senate and has a hearing tomorrow. So that bill's moving. HB 1360 is, frankly, in my mind, but I think in the mind of this commission as well, is not a good bill. It's a bill to alter the transition to zero emission vehicles so that you could include propane powered school buses. So all the incentives around electrifying zero emission vehicles would apply to a propane. And it was heard in the House and it hasn't moved. I don't think it will move, but that's out there. The next one, the Brighter Tomorrow Act, is solar. And this has been heard in both the House and the Senate. And it's, well, it hasn't crossed over yet. Neither bill has crossed over yet. Both chambers have heard it. Both chambers have worked on it. There is some disagreement on what exactly should proceed forward with that bill. And particularly around the multiplier for rooftops and parking lots and that type of solar development. And so my understanding is that there's good people with every intention of getting this bill through both chambers and done, but it'll be a conference committee kind of a discussion because there's some disagreements on what's the best way to do it there. Next bill is the Renew Act, if you will. This is a proposal for funding in which a fee is put on companies that are the largest fossil fuel producers in the world. And it's a one-time fee, would generate, I think, $9 billion. And it had a hearing, but it hasn't crossed over. And I think my understanding is the likelihood of it passing is not very high. And then the RPS bill we talked about, budget we talked about. Yeah, I think that's everything that I was going to give you an update on. So still a lot in play. One of the things that is making this year particularly challenging is the number of bills that are in. It's the high water mark, and so it's a lot for legislative services to draft these bills and draft amendments and keep up with it. So things have been late. It's also a lot for the legislators to get through committee hearings and a lot for advocates to lobby on. So the volume is amazing. So, but 3 weeks, 2.5, something like that left. So April 8th, so signing day.
Mark, I know we've run over. Can we give 5 minutes just for public comment?
At your wish. Yeah, anyone
If anybody needs to leave, fine. But if someone wants to make public comment, raise your hand. We'll try to divide up the time as best we can. If no one does, that's fine too, because we'll run well over. Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll be pretty quick here. I was really happy to see that there's a focus now on vehicle miles traveled policies within the mitigation working group. I also just wanted to emphasize, as much as we're also looking at policies that will reduce vehicle miles traveled, we need to make sure that future projects don't offset those increases. people may have seen that the Transportation for America released analysis that indicates that the IIJA funds have actually been increasing transportation emissions overall. And so we need to make sure that this really is an effort to rethink how MDOT plans and programs future projects into the budget so that overall we're getting to those VMT increases. So I wanted to encourage that as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I didn't see any other hands, so thank you all. I do have a feeling like Mark did that we're going to come back to those charts and talk further about them because I certainly found them very useful. Kim and Mark, anything I'm leaving out?
No, good for me. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you all
thank you.
again. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, sorry for everyone that we had to shorten today's meeting to just an hour, but we'll do our best to do at least a 2-hour meeting in April and touch on all these topics and the whole legislative recap. It'll be a busy one. So anyhow, thanks for the bonus time today and take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.